It's me again, Kalisha Washington. Um, this is my last day on the East Coast, and I spent some time in Baltimore, Maryland, some time in Washington, D.C., of course, because, like, who comes to the East Coast and doesn't visit the capital of the United States of America? And also spent a lot of time in Virginia, Mount Vernon, Virginia, Richmond, Virginia, Shirley, and Berkeley, Virginia. If you haven't heard of those things, don't worry. I'm about to fill you in about it right now. So I'm going to start with Mount Vernon, Virginia, because that was the home of George Washington, the first president of the United States of America. And there's so much history there. I learned so much there. Some of it was confirmation of what I'd already learned. It was good to see that history was like confirming itself through multiple sources, but also like I learned a lot of new information. So one of the things that was really interesting is that George Washington married money. Okay, he married Martha Custis, who was married to a guy who had a lot of slaves. He died without a will, Mr. Custis. I don't know his first name, not important to me. But he died without a will, but with a lot of slaves. And so Martha inherited his slaves as well as their children inherited his slaves. So from what I'm told, they couldn't sell their slaves, they couldn't free their slaves, they had no power to do any of that legally. Okay, so George Washington had his own slaves. By the time he was like close to death, he did an inventory of all of his like property. And found he had like 317 slaves between him and his wife. He ended up writing a will. Like his views started changing over time after the American Revolution. You know, he fought in the American Revolution. We won our freedom from Great Britain. We meaning America won its freedom from Great Britain, because you all know, and we all know, slaves didn't get their freedom at that time. But then his thoughts started changing. And apparently he felt like, I need to do something differently. It's not okay for me to own slaves while at the same time I'm fighting for freedom. But he wasn't public with those thoughts and opinions. He just like kept those kind of private to himself. But he did write in his will that he was going to free his slaves upon his wife's death. So he's like, I'm probably going to die first. If I die first, like, I don't want the slaves to be gone and my wife be without help. But when she dies, then we'll release our slaves. That's noble-ish, and it probably made him feel good about himself, but it doesn't make me feel good about any part of this, because the reality is, like, you still got the use of these slaves. You still use them as your property during this time. So, like, you're becoming conscious-ish, but not quite conscious enough for you to actually release your slaves and give them freedom and like treat them like human beings and teach them how to read and write and like give them money or give them land. So, like, what did you actually do? Not much. You said, when my wife dies, I'm going to let my slaves go free. And so, of course, they say he had no power and authority to release his wife's slaves. So the problem with that is, like, even when his slaves got freed, many of them had husbands and wives and children who were owned on the Custis side, and they didn't get freed. One thing that was interesting to me, like, I read that Martha ended up releasing the slaves early. She released them a year earlier than, like, they were supposed to be released on her death, but she released them a year before she died. And of course, she had no way of knowing she was going to die in a year, but she released them before she died. But they said, but most likely the reason why she did that was because she was afraid they were going to kill her, because they got their freedom upon her death. So to save herself, she decided to go ahead and release George Washington's slaves ahead of time. So of course, many of them stayed behind because their loved ones were there. But one thing that bothered me even before that, even before George Washington died, like several of his slaves ran away. Two that are remarkable that we've learned about a lot about. Oni Judge, she ran away. She was like the main servant to Martha. Martha was not happy with that. Like, to say she was not happy with that was an understatement. Like, she had her husband like sending people to chase her around all over the country looking for her. They had found her multiple times. She kept getting away. They kept like tracking her down, trying to get her to come back, offered her different things. Like, if you come back, then this, and we'll offer you freedom if that. And she was like, no, I'm good. I'm already free, boo. So she kept it pushing. And then there was Hercules. He was the main cook. And I mean, this was really just like something that George Washington could not believe. He was just like, how can he run away? Like, we treat him like he's family. But he's not family. He's not inheriting any of your land. He's not inheriting any of this plantation. You're not even allowing him to read or write. You're shocked that because you treat him so well as a slave, that he would want to run away and get his freedom. And I'm like, how conscious are you really if you are surprised that this man wants to be a man instead of being property? And then French people came to visit Mount Vernon, and they talked to his daughter and asked her, like, how do you feel your dad is gone? Are you sad that he's gone? And she was like, no, I'm happy. He's free. And they were shocked. Like, you don't miss your dad? But the reality is, she could be missing her dad because one of them got sold south to pick cotton. As a matter of fact, one of George Washington's slaves who ran away and got caught, they sent his behind to the West Indies to work on a sugar plantation where the average life expectancy was 7 years. So should she be mad? Should she be sad that her dad ran away and he's no longer with her? No, she's like, my dad is free. And for that, I'm happy. And people are shocked. I don't understand why you're shocked. Like, of course, people want their freedom. Of course, people want to be treated like human beings. Like, we're still fighting for that today in this 2018. And we're still fighting to be treated like human beings on a different level, but still fighting to be treated like human beings. So anyways, but I had a wonderful experience at Mount Vernon. There was a tribute to the Africans, the slaves who were buried there. They have a burial ground that they found. We got to do a tribute. Of course, I volunteered to participate in that because, I mean, how could I not? That was amazing. Our tour guide was amazing. He kept it real about everything that was going on. He was very knowledgeable, older white gentleman. He was amazing. We loved him. And so I guess since I'm talking about that plantation, I moved from that plantation to some other plantations. I mean, really, if you've seen one plantation, you've seen them all. But we went to Shirley Plantation. And this is in Richmond, near Richmond, Virginia, maybe like 20 minutes out. But the Shirley Plantation, huge, acres and acres. They had wheat, they had corn, they had horses, they have vineyards, they have like a lot. They talked about how this is the only plantation that was completely symmetrical. Like, if you split the house in half, it would be completely symmetrical. And then even the other buildings and structures that are on the property are completely symmetrical to one another. It was amazing. It was a beautiful sight to see. I was like, I kind of want something like that when I get my dream home. They walked us through. That tour guide was also amazing. A younger black gentleman who was probably in his late 20s or early 30s, but it seems like a history freak like me because he knew his stuff very well. But he walked us through the house, and as we toured the house, he like took us through the lineage, and like the current heirs to this property are a set of twins that are about 2-3 years old, little girl and little boy, cute as a button. And they're going to inherit this entire plantation, which is amazing. You know, they make money off of doing tours, and like they have all this other stuff. They're right on the James River. I mean, prime location, beautiful home, all of these things. Someone asked the question, like, do you know what happened to the slaves who used to work here and like their descendants? And so he responded to that question, and it wasn't me who asked that question. I mean, it's a question I would ask, but I didn't. Someone else had asked this question, and he said, well, yeah, there's about 103 or 108, something like that, families who live within 30 minutes of here who can trace their lineage back to the Shirley Plantation. And he said many of them are working in the factories near here. And he named the factories. And when he did, my heart broke, because the heirs to the Shirley Plantation have inherited all of, they don't have to worry about what kind of work they're going to do. they can just grow up to pick their noses and flick the boogers and measure it to see how far it goes if they want to. But the descendants of the slaves who worked on this plantation are working in factories, toiling in what is most likely a low-paying job. And even if it's not a low-paying job, it's not like inheriting a plantation. And so, again, I reflect back on like how people say things like, get over slavery. How can I get over it when I'm seeing the effects of it still active and alive today? The privilege of being born into this white slave-owning, plantation-owning family has given you benefits just from being born that the descendants of the slaves did not have. And many slaves did end up owning land. Some of it, after slavery, some of it the people who they worked for gave them land. Some of them worked really hard and purchased land. But it definitely broke my heart to hear that 100+ descendants of the slaves who worked on this plantation are working in factories. And not all of them are working in factories, but even the fact that it's a number that is high enough for him to have mentioned that they're working in these factories, that hurt my heart a little bit. And then just down the street was the Berkeley plantation. And honestly, if you've seen one, you've seen them all. We went to some plantation today and we're like, manor house, schmanor house. We're not going in the manor house. You've seen one manor house, you've seen all the manor houses. But we did go to Berkeley and we toured that one. And the Berkeley plantation has been there for over 400 years. And it was home to one of the governors of Virginia. Also, 2 presidents of the United States of America were born and raised there. And so they have a lot of history also on the James River. We didn't spend a lot of time talking about the slavery there, but I was able to go into a room where they had the rosters of the slaves that they owned. And they would have a name and age and how much they bought them for, and their property rosters. And it's hurtful. It is hurtful to see things like that. How much they purchased this person for, and how much they purchased that person for, sold this person for. The ledgers are right there for you to see. But I have my little notes over here, things that I wanted to make sure that I covered. So done with Mount Vernon. Washington, D.C. Went to the African American Museum. It was the best thing since sliced bread. We spent all day there. Online it said that most people spend 4 hours there. You can't do this thing in 4 hours. You can't do it justice in 4 hours. Started from slavery, from the 1400s on the bottom floor. You walk your way up. They say it's a mile and a half walk to the top. But as you're coming up, it goes over time. So it goes slavery, then it goes Reconstruction, then it goes into civil rights movement, and then into the 60s, and there's a whole Emmett Till presentation there. They have his casket that he was buried in, because I think it was 2005 or something, they dug up his remains to do a DNA test. For whatever reason, I don't know. And when they did, they transferred his remains to a new casket, and his original casket is on display in this museum. That was amazing. And I taught my students about this last year. It was they could not believe something like that would happen to a boy who was only 14 years old. That's just a couple years older than they were, because I had 5th graders, and they were just appalled by it. But that is the truth of what happens here in America. Now, folks are just getting shot down by the police and stuff like that, instead of lynched in that same way and tied to a wheel from a cotton gin and thrown into the water. But although it's a little different on how things are being done in some ways, Black lives still are not valued. So let's see what else it is that I wanted to talk about. Today I had an amazing day. You see my Harriet Tubman shirt on. Oh yeah, one more thing, Richmond, Virginia. So we went to the White House of the Confederacy, where Jefferson Davis lived, and his wife, and children. And like, I wanted to visit that because I study a lot about the Union side. I don't really study about the Confederate side much. And, I have no regrets about the fact that I don't study the Confederate side much. I don't. Y'all lost. And, oh, should I say get over it? Like he told me to get over slavery? Anyways, I did want to go and see. I wanted to see what the other side's perspective was. And it was very interesting to see. The tour guide there also was amazing. Another white gentleman, probably in his 50s, late 40s, early 50s, but very knowledgeable. He talked about how one of the cooks there, who was also a slave, he was like, after about a year of working in the White House, he decided that this wasn't the career he wanted to go into, and he left quietly one night, never to be found again. And I was like, oh, okay, runaway slave, love it. But he got away. And, my heart jumps for joy a little bit every time a slave runs away and gets away. Because you got your freedom, and you got your life, and you got your humanity. But that was very interesting. It was interesting to see the Confederate side, and when they say we, it's a different we than the we I've been accustomed to talking about. But it was interesting to see like the battle flags. They had actual battle flags, like the Confederate flags, and when it got captured, like the soldiers who captured it would like sign it and date it, and like they had those like captured flags. It was amazing to see, because this flag was actually in the war, and it was captured by the other side being the Union. So yeah, we spent some time there in that museum and in that house. It was interesting also, I did ask that tour guide, like, where did the slaves live? Because we didn't see the slave quarters. And he said, well, they didn't like to call them slaves, they like to call them servants. And I'm like, it does not change the fact that they were slaves for life. But whatever, they felt better about themselves by calling them servants instead of slaves, whatever. Here you go again, trying to appease your consciences. But he said most of them didn't live in the house. Most of them, like if you worked in the stables, you lived next to the stables or on top of or somewhere around there. If you were a cook, you lived in the kitchen. The kitchen was a separate building. And so you lived there, not in the kitchen, but you would have like sleeping quarters in the building of the kitchen, which was interesting. So I did learn a lot, and I was very grateful for this opportunity. But today was pretty special because I got to like visit a place that was a stop on the Underground Railroad, which, this is my heart. Harriet Tubman, I've been studying Harriet Tubman since kindergarten. This part of the Underground Railroad wasn't specific to Harriet Tubman, but it was a stop on the Underground Railroad. And then we went to Frederick Douglass's home. And like I stood in Frederick Douglass's home, and he actually died right there in the hallway of his home, and I stood in the spot where Frederick Douglass died. Period. This man dedicated his life to working for the cause of African Americans, getting our freedom. Once we got our freedom, getting our right to vote. Once we got our right to vote, getting women their right to vote. Like, this was an amazing man. And, from our tour guide there, she just talked about how Frederick Douglass worked up until he died. Till the day he died. That he never retired. And, he was a slave. He ran away. He got his freedom. Well, he ran away. Some people later purchased his freedom. But he worked until the day he died for the cause of humanity. And I was just really encouraged by that, and it made me want to spend more time doing more for my community and my world, the world in which I live, because like there's still a lot of work to do. there's still a lot of work to do here in America, fighting for equal rights and justice. And like, even when he had accomplished all that he wanted to accomplish for black men, he took the attitude that I still need to do more for other people. Like, women are still oppressed, and I'm gonna help them. And I just love that heart of not just, he said, when I ran away, I did that for me, did that for self. He said, when I fought for emancipation, I did that for my people. He said, but when I'm fighting for women, self has nothing to do with it. I'm doing what's right for other people. And I'm like, I have to do that. There's so much work that I have to do for women and for black women and for black people as a whole. And so self is very much involved in that, because like, we're not free yet. We're not to the place where we need to be yet. But at the same time, like, I want to take up the fight. I want to do more. I want to be active. I want to encourage you all to be active. I vote in every election. I want to encourage you to vote in every election. Like, this man worked until his dying day to make sure that blacks and women would have the right to vote. Women didn't get the right to vote during his lifetime, but they did soon after, probably because of a lot of the work that he did. But he had 2 meetings the day he died, and he had a speaking engagement the night he died. And as he was getting ready to leave the house to go to that speaking engagement, he fell out and died in the hallway of his home. And I'm like, that's somebody who labored for life. As a free man, labored for life. So many slaves labored for life until they died. Many of them dying on the field, on the cotton fields, on the tobacco fields, on the sugar fields, like all of these things. But this man died in his own home. They said that his home he purchased was like $6,700, which is equivalent to over $1 million right now. 15 acres. It started off being like 9 or 10 acres when he bought it, but he expanded it and bought another 5 acres and made it 15 acres. He had a 14-room house. He expanded it to a 21-room house. A former slave, you know, who wrote many books, who taught himself to read and write, and then wrote many books. And I'm so encouraged by him and his life. He influenced like 8 or 9 presidents, you know, and I'm just like, this is crazy. He's done a lot of work, and he did not stop working until he died. So I'm encouraged. I know I can do more. I will do more. I hope you all will do more as well. 22 minutes and change. I'm going to sign off on that. I'm sure there's plenty that I'm missing that I wanted to say, but it'll end up in another video, probably.